Hello, everyone, and welcome to Moms with a Mic. Marissa Bagg here with my dear sister and colleague, Julia Bagg.
Hi there.
Talk about the COVID vaccine, specifically for the last age group that has not had access to it so far, which is our youngest, 6 months to 4 years of age. Right, Jules?
Yeah, right up until 5 years, right? So we know that the FDA is debating the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine possibilities for some of our youngest kids. That's happening right now, right, Marissa, as we speak. And so we know you've got questions. We've got questions. And so we've got a pediatrician to help answer your questions today.
So let's go ahead and bring her in. We're talking about Dr. Danielle Squires. She is a pediatrician at Kings Bay Pediatrics down in the southern part of Dade, right? That's the Pinecrest area that you serve, Doctor?
Yes, that's right.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today. We know that given now we're well over 2 years into this pandemic, that COVID has kind of been first and foremost what you've been handling in your practice for a long time.
Yes, we've spent a lot of time on high alert over the last few years, and it's unfortunately not going anywhere. We are still seeing a pretty steady load of COVID cases in the office right now.
So let's talk about that, just kind of a snapshot of what we're dealing with. Our numbers have been going up steadily, and I know you've mentioned even to me that that doesn't really paint the whole picture of what we're going through.
Exactly. When you look at the numbers, if you check out the Florida COVID data, you definitely see we're, on an upward trend. We are definitely in a wave. What we're not seeing is probably how extensive those numbers are. So many people are just doing home tests. Some people aren't testing at all. It's not like earlier in the pandemic where the only place to have a COVID test was if you drove through one of the government facilities. So I think we're really seeing significantly lower numbers than what's actually prevalent in the community right now.
Gotcha. And numbers that we do know of, Doctor, are on the rise, certainly in South Florida.
Absolutely.
So it's being underreported, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, just looking at the latest numbers, which came out June 2nd, because they come out every 2 Fridays now, was 71,000 for the whole state, which, when you think about what we saw in Omicron, what we saw in Delta, it doesn't sound terrible. But as you mentioned, if these aren't all the numbers, then that's what's scary. And even, in my family, I have several family members dealing with COVID right now, and all of them tested at home. So they're not included in those numbers. Right. So I guess what's your message to people right now? Does it seem like we're not taking it seriously, or that people aren't, aware that it is out there and it is prevalent?
I think we have two things going on. I think on the one hand, we have a lot of people who are more savvy and they are home testing and they are able to kind of navigate the situation on their own, especially those who are vaccinated and having milder cases. They take their home test, they quarantine at home, no one ever hears about it. I think that's one segment of the population. But I am often surprised to find out that when a child comes in sick in the office and I say I'd like to do a COVID test, sometimes parents are surprised that that's still really an issue. And sure enough, every day we're seeing cases in the office. I think, some of it is just COVID fatigue. It's been hard to be on such high alert for years now. And I think part of it is, other news stories have taken precedence and we've all wanted to continue on with our lives and measure, what's the risk benefit of carrying on with our lives and running the risk of getting COVID versus staying home. And so, people are definitely back out there.
Mm-hmm. And, I think that also parents of young children like Marissa and I, it's just been such a long wait for a vaccine to be approved. Right. And so now here we are this week with the FDA meeting right now, the CDC scheduled for later this week. I'm feeling hopeful. Tell me, what your thoughts are on that, Dr. Squires.
I'm also feeling hopeful. I have 2 kids, one who is old enough to have already received the vaccine. He's turning 7, but my daughter is 3 and she's actively waiting for her vaccine too. It's hard to be in that family situation where 3 of us are vaccinated and one isn't. And, we want to protect our baby, of course. I'm hopeful that during the meeting today of the FDA that they are going to in fact approve the vaccine for 6 months and up. And I think that could be a pretty big turning point in the pandemic, because until now we haven't been able to vaccinate everyone. And certainly families with young kids have felt very left behind as the rest of the world has resumed, their normal day to day.
So this meeting that the FDA is holding right now started about 9 o'clock this morning. I was listening to it a little bit earlier, and it seems like one of the main questions that they're looking at this point is, do the benefits outweigh the risks of the COVID vaccine, both for the Moderna version and the Pfizer version? So what would be your response to that question? I know you haven't seen all the data. Obviously, it's being presented as we speak, but they have explain that it's very similar to the results we saw in adults. So what would be your message right now for how you think this is going to play out?
I would imagine that it's going to play out exactly like you said, very similar to the older age groups. So, the 5 to 11-year-olds, which were the most recently approved. We had a pretty positive side effect profile, meaning that there wasn't a whole lot. What we saw in that age group and what I'm hearing out of the studies in the little ones is very mild side effects, if at all, primarily being a sore arm, next being more fatigue, feeling a little under the weather for a day or so. I expect that it's going to be approved because I think whatever we can do to mitigate risk in this younger age group, I think is what we need to do. And this younger age group, bears a lot to gain from being able to be out and about more. And certainly that age group is hit harder often by COVID than even their slightly older counterparts.
Yeah. And Marissa, that was something you were pointing out, and just looking at the statistics, the latest statistics on that, when it comes to COVID deaths in that age range.
Absolutely. It's very...
I see you're looking at something.
Yeah, sorry about that. You dropped out for a second. It's really interesting when you consider how COVID affects children and other diseases like influenza. So we were looking, I was looking at those numbers because the FDA was talking about that when I was listening earlier, and we have kind of this information to show you. It's staggering to me as a parent with 2 kids under 5 that more children have died from COVID just this year up until June 2nd. That's 147 deaths from COVID, children between infants and under 5, just between January 1st and June 2nd. And when you consider influenza deaths, which is something that we vaccinate for, it's much lower than that over a 3-year span of 2018 to 2020. So I just think that that's a stat that people don't realize, that COVID, not only are kids getting sick, kids are being hospitalized, and kids are passing away from this virus.
Yeah, doctor, do you feel like, we're just becoming complacent and maybe losing our fear or health? A healthy fear of COVID? What's your take on that?
A little bit. Fortunately, over the course of the pandemic, kids have done fairly well with COVID compared to adults. But as you pointed out, the death rates from COVID and the hospitalization rates, certainly in this age group, are exponentially higher than flu, and then also than their counterparts in some of the older childhood age groups. So it is the little ones who are at greater risk. And I think as a parent, whatever I can do to help my child and to keep them as healthy as possible, I'm going to want to do. And actually, interesting, we know that when we look at flu and flu deaths in children, flu deaths in children are by and large the unvaccinated children as well. Just something to point out.
Gotcha. So what's going to be the difference here in this meeting today with the FDA? What do they have to see to give the green light for the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines?
So they're going to take a look. They're going to really crunch the numbers. They're going to look at how effective the vaccine it was at preventing COVID and also just preventing more serious illness like hospitalizations and death. They're going to look at the side effect profile. As far as I know, again, it hasn't all been released, but it doesn't seem like there were really any serious side effects in children in this age group. And then they're also looking at dosing, because the dosing is different in this age group than it was for the older children and adults.
Gotcha.
And let's talk about how it's going to be administered, because it's similar to what we've seen with the adult vaccine, right? That the Moderna vaccine would be 2 shots for this young age group, and then slightly different for Pfizer, it's a 3-shot series.
Correct. So Pfizer's a 3-shot series. They are looking at the immune response, and it seems like it wasn't comparable to the older age groups after only 2 doses, likely because it was a smaller amount given. So Pfizer's in a 3-shot series a month apart, and in Moderna, it's going to be a 2 vaccine series also a month apart.
Gotcha. And I know from what I've just been reading in the New York Times, it's likely that kids will need boosters.
I think we're all going to need boosters. I think we're looking at a situation where maybe it's a yearly, like a flu shot, with the hopes that they start to tailor the vaccine to whatever variant is prevalent at the time. So I think, while we are probably going to have to view this like we view our flu shots that we needed every year, I think we need to give it the full, regard it with the same level of even greater serious than even the flu shot.
And I imagine, we're starting to get a few comments in, some from people who are skeptical. I certainly don't want to ignore them. So I'm just going to read one of them that just came in. It says, what's the long-term damage you could be doing to your children with this vaccine? There are no long-term studies. Do you want to risk that for your kids?
That's a great question. And that's always the question the parents ask with all vaccines. Obviously, this is a new vaccine, and in that we haven't had years to study it. We've had a couple years though that we've had this vaccine now. We've been dealing with COVID for a while. The adults started taking the vaccine, back in December of 2020 with studies even before that. And the older children have had it now for, since, 9 months or so, since, November, October when it came out. For the 5 and up age group. So we've had a fair amount of time to look at this. And we know, the vaccine science for this vaccine isn't so different from all the vaccines we give kids normally. So we know that you don't see long-term consequences of vaccines. If you're going to have a side effect, if you're going to have an issue, it happens right away within the first few days. And we're just not seeing that. And I also sometimes like to turn that question on its head with parents. Yes, we don't have longitudinal studies on the COVID vaccine, of course. How could we? But we also don't have longitudinal studies on COVID. So I don't know what's going to be, what's going to come down 10 years from now with all this generation of children that had COVID. I do know that I see kids with long haul COVID in my office.
Tell us about that.
Age and high school age. And I certainly have patients who have fatigue, they have headaches, they have abdominal symptoms. Some of the teenagers, even with some more mental health concerns that came out of after their illness. And oftentimes these kids are kids who had very mild cases. So their parents didn't think much of it. And then coming out of COVID, they discovered that their kids just weren't shaking some of it.
Wow.
And also looking at the positive side of it, because so often people are like, well, we don't know, it could be bad. I mean, we have data that the vaccine has been overwhelmingly positive in Florida, in the United States, and in the world, right? Millions of people have gotten the vaccine and
that's exactly right.
been saved or kept out of the hospital altogether because of the vaccine.
We've never had such a large sample size when it comes to how many people have received the vaccine and how well everyone's done. And, I can certainly say as a parent of a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, I, truly don't have reservations. The FDA has a very rigorous process where they scrutinize the vaccines, and they're not going to approve a vaccine where there is a large risk. Of course, if you're nervous, this is what your pediatrician is for. So talk to your pediatrician, talk to your doctor. Every kid is different, so I can't speak to every individual, of course. But it seems like by and large, the vaccine's going to be, the safest way forward for most children.
So Julia had mentioned before, between the two of us, we have 4 children under 5. I'm actually coming up on 8 months pregnant right now, so we're about to have another. So let's say I just come into your office and I say, Dr. Squires, I know the FDA is talking about this right now. Should I vaccinate my 4.5-year-old and my 2-year-old if they give the green light and if the CDC also gives the green light?
I would certainly encourage it. Obviously, I would have to know their whole history. But yes, I would encourage it. And especially in a situation where you're going to have an infant in the home and the infant's going to be too young to be vaccinated. With all babies, we want to cocoon them. We want everyone surrounding them to be healthy. So we want them vaccinated for COVID, for flu. We want them up to date on their routine vaccines. Whatever we can do to keep infants healthy, because at the end of the day, the newborns are really at high risk.
Gotcha. Oh, that's so good to hear.
Yeah. And I think what are, maybe parents are wondering, of course you say you talk to your pediatrician. What are some instances where a pediatrician may say, okay, don't get the vaccine, or, those must be rare cases. What would an example of that be?
It is very rare. Certain very immune compromised, maybe cancer patients who are in the middle of chemotherapy would be a possibility. The only other one is really if you're allergic to one of the components of the vaccine, which is also exceedingly rare. So it's very unlikely. Certain patients have subspecialists who are involved in their care, so sometimes it's worth a discussion with them. But typically, a lot of the subspecialists, neurologists, cardiologists, people who care for kids with chronic conditions are across the board pretty supportive of vaccinating those kids, because those kids are at higher risk if they get COVID.
And we also, kind of talked about right now, another reason to want to keep our kids healthy is because there's other viruses going around, right? Right now, especially here in South Florida, where that you're seeing an uptick in RSV and flu and things like that. Do you want to talk about that just to alert parents?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you bring up. But we are definitely seeing more respiratory viruses. And when I say respiratory viruses, I mean COVID, flu, RSV, common colds, than we typically see at this time of year. Usually winter we see more. People are more gathered inside. Florida's a little bit different than somewhere in the Northeast, but even so, we tend to have a bit of a slowdown over the summer. But I think, we've been kind of contained and sheltered for so long, and people are out and about more, and there's less mask usage. We're definitely seeing more respiratory illnesses in kids and flu in kids, and the hospitals are more full. So that also being said, you don't want to have a situation where your child has COVID. They need to utilize the hospital service system. And now it's so full of kids with COVID, but also flu and RSV and other illnesses. So whatever we can do to keep our kids healthy and out of the hospital, that's what we want to do.
And let's talk about what these vaccines for younger kids essentially are, right? We're talking about very small doses of what adults receive. Can you tell us, one is a 10th of?
Correct. Exactly. Yes. So the Pfizer vaccine is a 10th of what adults receive, and the Moderna is a quarter. So we're talking very small dosages, and they degrade fairly quickly in the body. So your body produces its immune response, and then the mRNA is kind of out of your system fairly quickly. And we're just priming the immune system that if it encounters COVID, it recognizes it, which means, hopefully you don't get sick at all. But, we now know as COVID mutates that you may still get it, but you usually get it less severe. And that's the goal. The goal is to make this as manageable as possible so that it just becomes part of the regular colds and viruses that we see every year, part of the fabric of the respiratory illnesses that are, just common, but not so severe.
And how have parents of your 5 to 11-year-olds responded? The latest numbers, according to the Department of Health here in Florida, is that about 1 in 4 children in that age group have been vaccinated. So how have you kind of seen that evolve in the months that they've had access, and how have you, encouraged them to get vaccinated?
Well, I think our population is probably higher than that here in Miami-Dade. I think we have higher vaccination rates. It's certainly not as high as we would like it to be, and it's not as high as the adults. It's interesting because I'll see a lot of families where the adults are vaccinated, even the teenagers, and maybe the younger ones are not. But it's often those younger ones that then bring it into the household. They come in with their COVID and maybe it's not so bad, and then grandpa gets it. And so, I think we need to try to protect everybody here. We know that the kids do so well with the vaccine. They have very minimal side effects in that 5 to 11 age group also. So I encourage them to get it, even in families where maybe the child had COVID already and it wasn't so severe. We just don't know what the next wave is necessarily going to bring. We hope it's milder and milder illness, but we don't know yet. So I do encourage my patients to get their vaccine, and I would tell families who are on the fence that that's a great talk to have with their pediatrician. It's definitely coming into the summer of travel, and then the upcoming school year. I would continue to have that conversation with my pediatrician.
Okay, and I'm just looking at a comment coming in here. What about naturally acquired antibodies? How does that?
So naturally acquired antibodies, meaning having had COVID. And certainly you get antibodies that way. But what we've seen throughout this pandemic is those antibodies wane fairly quickly. So it seems like the immunity from the vaccine holds up better. Certainly people who've both had COVID and have had the vaccine, usually their immune systems are the most primed of everybody. Which is probably going to be everyone at some point because this is just going to keep circulating. But naturally acquired immunity, I personally don't think is sufficient, at least for my own family, my own children. I want to do everything in my power to protect them. Just like I vaccinate for other illnesses that maybe aren't even as common, like chickenpox and measles. It's very unlikely my child's going to encounter that, but I'm absolutely vaccinating them on time and on schedule because whatever I can prevent, I want to go to sleep at night knowing I did everything I could to keep my kid healthy. So
kind of just for you, it's a no-brainer. It sounds like that's the
message. Pediatricians, this is what we do. We do vaccines. We spend a lot of time studying it and learning about it in med school and residency, and it's a big part of our job. It's not our whole job. There's certainly a lot more that goes into it, but we're spending a lot of time talking about it now during COVID. That's for sure.
Sure. And I mean, it's got to be difficult for you and other pediatricians overcoming sort of, you mentioned it before, just, the COVID, how people are tired of just dealing with this for so long and maybe become complacent, right. COVID fatigue as, and, oh, my kid had it, but got through it. Should I still, so it's about protecting your family the best that you can. That's what getting a vaccine for the youngest children would be.
Absolutely. And I understand COVID fatigue. We're all fatigued. I don't want to talk about it anymore either. But the reality is it's definitely here for at least for now. And I would just look at it as part of your child's preventative care. So when you bring them to see me, for their well visits, for example, I'm measuring their height and their weight, and there may not be any active issues, but we're going to do everything we can to keep you healthy. Just like I'm going to recommend, making sure you eat your fruits and vegetables and making sure you get some exercise and you wear your sunscreen. I want you to get your COVID shot. It's all part of just keeping your child healthy.
And you mentioned protecting the whole family, even, I know that's also a component when you think of vaccinating, whether it's an adult, an older child, and now looking at younger children to protect everybody. A friend of ours, Marissa, I was just speaking with this morning, shared with me how her mother was just a healthy working woman in her late 60s, and now has severe lung damage. She was unvaccinated when she had COVID. That's just one example of, not to mention, of course, the death numbers from COVID, but just the long haul impacts that people can have. And to me, just hearing that this morning was a reminder, of how serious this is.
Absolutely. We all are part of a community. So whatever we can do to take care of each other, I think, we all need to take a look at that.
And Dr. Squires, let's talk kind of getting back to where we are in the potential approval for this vaccine for the young age group. Let's talk a little bit about the timeline. Typically, I mean, we've covered it from 18 plus to then 12 to 17, 5 to 11. Obviously we're getting down to the youngest now. Typically, if the FDA were to approve today, usually the CDC gives a thumbs up within 24 hours. And then sometimes the vaccine is available for that newer age group the next day. I mean, so do you think by Friday, if not by Monday, this could be something that parents can start to look in? Where can I take my 5 and under child to get a vaccine?
I hope so. It does. You're absolutely right. The turnaround's pretty quick. The CDC gives its blessing. Usually the American Academy of Pediatrics also weighs in, which is great. Because they give great guidance also. It'll really just be about distribution because the dose is different. It's, they're going to have to send the proper dosaging to the pharmacies and the hospital systems that are going to distribute the vaccine. So it depends where you live. If you're in a
sorry,
area.
doctor, we're having some.
No, I think we hear her just fine.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Basically just it depends on access. If they're able to get vaccines to the distributors in a timely fashion, then I think we could have them hopefully, at least going into next week. Parents, I would kind of be ready, start to make some plans.
And is it something you would have at your office, or would kids go to the pharmacy, a local pharmacy? What would you suggest?
It depends on the office. A lot of local pediatricians aren't able to stock it for storage and reasons. But usually all the local pharmacies here in Miami, CVS and Walgreens, Publix, and Miami Children's or Nicholas Children's, excuse me, they do vaccine clinics as well. So there should be a lot of resources. Once the vaccine's approved, it should hopefully hit the ground running.
And what would you tell a parent, even if they had an older child vaccinated, obviously under 5, right? It's a little bit more sensitive of an age range, especially if we're talking about like under the age of 1, you can kind of do it and they don't realize what happened. It might be your 2 or 3-year-old that kind of knows the drill. But any advice that you would give to parents, or maybe a caregiver who hasn't taken this child in before, but just what should they be ready for if they're taking their kid to get this vaccine?
So it is tricky because a lot of pediatricians' offices don't do it. And the pediatrician's office, we're all like prepared on, hold them down and, do it real quick and, there's a prize. I think you got to know your child. Some kids do better if they're prepared. If you say, you know what, we're going to get a shot. It's going to keep you healthy. It's going to keep grandma healthy. I think it does sometimes help to prepare the child. But, you really just kind of want to be in and out as quickly as possible. So I would just go as a parent prepared to, give your child a big hug and take them for a special treat afterwards.
And generally, how have parents, I guess in your practice, do you have a fair amount of parents who have been waiting anxiously for this to get approved so that they can vaccinate their children?
Absolutely. It's a mixed bag, of course, but I have a lot of parents that every time they come in, Dr. Squires, is it going to be ready yet? What have you heard? And, I wish I was privy to more information, but I'm hopeful that this is going to be the moment now.
Yeah, me too. Us too. We've been looking forward to it. I think we're among the parents who just felt like, why is this taking so long? But I'm really excited also because, summer is here. You like to make travel plans if possible. And just, I know all of that increases exposure and you just want to protect your kids as much as possible. Summer camps and then back to school. So looking ahead to all of that, I'm feeling hopeful, certainly.
Well, and not only that, you think of all the collateral damage around when somebody is sick with COVID and you have unvaccinated family members under 5, especially those, who haven't been able to access it yet. Who can you get to come care for them, who may not want to be exposed themselves? How often can you stay home from work? Or, I have been trying to avoid COVID like the plague because I'm pregnant, and I've heard adverse, issues that friends of mine have had, because they're about to give birth, and it has affected their delivery because they got COVID late, especially during Omicron.
Mhm.
So, whenever we have these scares, which it's like, wow, this is still happening, 2 years into the pandemic. It's just like, how do I take care of my kid? How do I protect my kid? And if they were at least vaccinated, you would know that they're not going to be the one in however many that ends up hospitalized or, God forbid, in the ICU. So I think that at least for me, is going to be the relief, is that they're protected enough that if they do get sick, they should not end up in the hospital or worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what
you've seen that a lot in your practice, doctor, right? People coming with these other issues. It's not that anybody is severely sick, but it's just you're dealing with, adverse effects of an impact from COVID.
It's logistical and economic and emotional, and there's a big toll for sure.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions we had. Julia, did you see anything else or have anything else in mind that you wanted to ask her while we have her undivided attention?
Yeah, I mean, just, Doctor, what this will look like, as we expect an approval here, as soon as next week, maybe, seeing vaccines, like, will parents just make an appointment, at your office, or make an appointment with their pediatrician? Like, what's the next step here for parents?
I think the next step is to go ahead and find the most convenient place to go ahead and sign up and get an appointment for their child's vaccine. And with any parents that still have any lingering concerns or questions, to either call your pediatrician's office or make an appointment to go in if there's something, pressing that you want to discuss. But because I'm hopeful that things are going to get moving pretty quickly. And, people always ask, well, when's the best time to get the vaccine? Should I do it right before I go on my trip, or should I wait, or should I do it when I get back? I think the answer is for most people, as soon as possible.
Dr. Squires, we just got an interesting question that came in that I want to share with you. It's got a couple of caveats, so just follow me through it. It's from a woman who has a 4-year-old son, Lindsay Campman, actually a very good friend of mine. She says her son is 3 months away from being 5. He turns 5 in September. Why can't he receive the 5-year-old vaccine now? He isn't underweight, and I'm concerned the 6 to 4-year-old vaccine will not be strong enough.
I understand. I hear that question a lot. I've had it, we had the same issue coming when kids were 11 turning 12, and then they approved for that age group. Vaccines, unlike medications in this age group, are done by age. And it's the age of the immune system, not the weight of the body. That's how they do it. So while I understand, because I have a really big 3-year-old that's almost the size of a 5-year-old, I would, I understand that. I think you don't want to wait. So I think you give what's approved for your age when you can give it, and then boosters down the road will be the bigger dose for 5-year-olds.
So your advice would be to, if this gets approved over the next 72 hours and is available next week, to go ahead and get the one that's approved for her son's age group, as opposed to waiting till September.
Correct, because we may get COVID.
Well, I actually know that he did have COVID a few months ago. Does that change your answer at all?
No.
Okay. Because some parents might think, well, he just had COVID, so he had some immunity, or some antibodies. But even if that was as recently as 3 months ago, you would say, get the vaccine you can get when you can get it.
Yes, I've seen enough kids get it and get it again 3 months later.
Wow. Okay.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, for that. That was a great question.
Yeah, great question. And Dr. Squires, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Looking forward to being able to protect our kiddos even better. Again, just thank you for your knowledge.
My pleasure.
Take care and good luck next week if this is all unfolding.
Yeah. We'll check back in with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
And thank you all for watching Moms with a Mic. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.